A lot of what's interesting about the RNC, the most interesting stuff, happens on the floor. And it's stuff that'll never get recorded. But every once in a while, now definitely in the age of the cell phone, you know, somebody will take out their phone camera and start recording. And apparently Kevin McCarthy, who, for those of you who don't know, was the former Republican leader in the House, was on the floor doing interviews. And then Matt Gaetz came around. Now, see, Matt Gaetz and Kevin McCarthy do not like each other. When it comes to House rivalries, this one is deep. This one is in the blood. It's kind of complicated, but Matt Gaetz is very much more of a fringe political outsider. He's somebody who doesn't agree with much of the party management, the managerial elite of the party, which Kevin McCarthy is a member of. And Kevin McCarthy believes people like Matt Gaetz has undermined through their blocking of legislation and through their throwing out of the leadership and just chaos creating, have undercut the Republicans for the House majority that they have had, and they haven't been able to get anything done. Matt Gaetz also specifically led the effort to get Kevin McCarthy ejected as House leader and replaced with someone else. That eventually ended with Mike Johnson stepping up to the plate after going through, I think it was going through Steve Scalise and a bunch of other people. Oh my God, I can't remember everybody it was. It's been a while. But yeah, so they don't like each other because they come from complete polar opposite factions within the party, and Matt Gaetz led the effort to get rid of Kevin McCarthy. Anyway, as Kevin McCarthy is giving an interview, Matt Gaetz tries to interrupt his interview by taunting him, saying, "Hey Kevin, what night are you speaking?" Meaning speaking on the main stage, because Kevin McCarthy is no longer House Speaker. He's no longer a man of influence like he once was. Anyway, here's the moment. It's very awkward.
Speaking. What night are you speaking? Are you speaking tonight? Or one person? No. Hey, you're not. If you took that stage, you would get booed off of it. You would get booed off the stage.
Okay, that right there though, that's pure spite. That is pure spite. That isn't for show. This isn't for fun. I don't think he was doing it for the cameras. I think he did it legitimately just because he does not like Kevin McCarthy and he wants to stick his thumb in his wounds and just letting him know how much he despises him. And everybody else just kind of ignores it. One like guy gets in between him as he keeps berating McCarthy before somebody else like tells him like, dude, what the chill, dog, chill. My goodness, could you imagine working with this guy on a daily basis? Like, I'm not a Kevin McCarthy guy. I don't like Kevin McCarthy really at all. But I could just imagine just having to listen to that grating voice poke you and poke you and poke you while you're trying to get everything else done. 95% of your parties on board. We're trying to get this deal or that deal done to at least keep the budget going. And you've got these few fringe maniacs, when you have a 2-seat majority, ready to blow up the entire party, blow up the entire process, because they want demands that they could never, ever get. But that they use such rhetoric and fundraising methods that the only way that they can drag attention to themselves is by, well, being the center of attention. That's the only way they can raise money. That's the only way they can achieve their fundraising goals. Is the only way they know how to interact with politics. So they got to do it again. They got to do it again. It's just a grating personality to be around all together. Honestly, I will say that I don't believe in much of an afterlife, but I know many people do. If there is an afterlife, Kevin McCarthy should have most of his sins forgiven for just having to work with this man. Gaetz paid his teenage prostitutes with Venmo. I don't even want to get into the teenage prostitutes thing. I don't know how far that goes, really. It can't be proven in a court of law, but there are there are Venmo payments for underage prostitutes. That's not, it's not something that I think most people have. It's not easy to explain away. Giving money to one man who then immediately handed it over to a teenage prostitute. And that's record. Trump disavowed Epstein after he made inappropriate remarks. I never really, the problem with Epstein is you don't know what people knew and when they knew it. It's the same problem with R. Kelly and a lot of these like pedophile celebrities which everyone kind of knows, or many people kind of know that they're a pedophile, but it's kind of just like an open secret. And Jeffrey Epstein was kind of like that for a bit. And it certainly was like that for R. Kelly. But it's a question of like when did people know, what did they know, and what did they say they know? And if they didn't say why they knew, why didn't they say why they knew? And that's how you have to judge people who interacted with Jeffrey Epstein. The thing that gets me about Trump is just that one line, and I can't get it out of my mind when I think about Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Is that line of like, oh, Jeffrey Epstein's my friend. He likes his girls, but on the younger side. And that line I just can't get out of my head, because how does he know he likes them on the younger side? And how young was Trump referring to? Was he referring to like early 20s, which would be young for both of them at that age and both obviously now? Or was he referring to what Jeffrey Epstein is now known for, and that he knew that and he was referencing that but couldn't say it directly, but maybe thought he could poke around a little bit because he was part of the New York socialite elite? I have no clue. But that line just has always stuck with me. And he's on those Epstein flight logs, but I mean, just being on the Epstein flight logs does not necessarily mean you did anything with some kids, but it's also immediately once you start have to explaining away your presence on the Epstein flight logs, you're already in a bad position. Here's the current comments from the ethics board on Matt Gaetz. Well, actually, I've never read this. I'm kind of curious to read this now. This is from June 18th. On April 9th, 2021, the committee announced it had initiated a review into allegations that Representative Matt Gaetz may have engaged in sexual misconduct and or illicit drug use, shared inappropriate images or videos on the House floor, misused state identification records, converted campaign funds for personal use, and or accepted a bribe, improper gratuity, or impersonable gift in violation of House rules, laws, or other standards of conduct. The committee deferred its consideration of the matter in response to requests from the Department of Justice. In May of 2023, the committee reauthorized this investigation after the DOJ withdrew its deferral request. There has been a significant and unusual amount of public reporting on the committee's activities, says Congress. Much of the reporting has been inaccurate. The committee's investigations are conducted confidentially, but the committee's confidentiality rules do not prohibit witnesses from disclosing information about the committee's requests or conversations with committee investigators. Yada, yada, yada. Here we go. Representative Gaetz has categorically denied all of the allegations before the committee, notwithstanding the difficulty in obtaining a relevant information from Representative Gaetz and others. The committee has spoken with more than a dozen witnesses, issued 25 subpoenas, and reviewed thousands of pages of documents in this matter. Based on its review to date, the committee has determined that certain of the allegations merit continued review. During the course of its investigation, the committee has also identified additional allegations that merit review. Accordingly, the committee is reviewing allegations pursuant to committee's Rules 14A3 and 18A that Representative Matt Gaetz may have engaged in sexual misconduct and illicit drug use, accepted improper gifts, dispensed special privileges and favors to individuals with whom he had personal relationship, and sought to obstruct the government investigation of his conduct. The committee will take no further action at this time on the allegations that he may have shared inappropriate images or videos on the House floor, misused state identification records, converted campaign funds to personal use, and or accepted a bribe or improper gratuity. So they're going straight for the kitty diddling. It sounds like they're dropping all of the like stuff on misuse of state identification records. And I think that is in reference to the case where he has a friend in Florida who got and this is the same friend that they're saying was paying these girls on Matt's behalf, where he was like misusing people's identification records for his own scheme. I think this might be in reference to that, but they're dropping all those things, but continuing the investigation into improper gifts, illicit drug use, and illicit sexual misconduct. The committee notes that the mere fact of an investigation into these allegations does not itself indicate that any violation has occurred. No other public comment will be made on this matter except in accordance with committee rules. Man, yeah, no, this does not clear it up at all. This just says like, hey, so we looked into the kitty diddling and the misuse of state records, misuse of campaign funds, bribery, and all this other stuff, and we're done with the you know, the misuse of a state identification records. Okay, that's it. Goodbye. It's like, wait, that's only that just makes me feel more suspicious. But we will wait. We will wait for the investigation to be done. We will wait because we are not disinformation heads. Okay, we're not misinformation heads. We got big brains here at the Dylan Burns TV channel, and we're gonna wait until we have all the evidence. It costs us nothing to wait and wait for Matt Gaetz to slowly cook. A slow burn. What's wrong with a slow burn? Why do we always need to wait for it to be just like ripped off like a band-aid? We can watch slowly. I mean, when there's smoke, there's fire, but it's strange he's never been charged. Like, someone is protecting him from prosecution, or there was no evidence. I mean, it could just be no evidence. I mean, like, you need to hit a certain standard to even be able to access, like, their personal records and their homes and get warrants and stuff like that. And some stuff ends, a lot of stuff, even when people committed crimes, you just don't have the evidence. Like, ends before you get to those points. But to actually get, when you're actually going through the process of getting that, like, okay, I got the warrant. Okay, we're going to go look through the records. Okay, we're going to go talk to the witnesses. It takes time. It takes time. But the fact that it's not cleared up yet and is just kind of looming over his head and is going to loom over his head through another election, it's kind of wild. I figured you'd like to see that since it's relevant. Glad you liked it. I had just not updated myself on Matt Gaetz, underage adventures. I have not done that yet, so I appreciate the update. The one RNC thing I wanted to say outside of the Matt Gaetz confrontation with Kevin McCarthy is the reception David Sachs got at the RNC. So David Sachs is a tech guy. He is an investor guy. And he has been getting a bigger voice on social media to the point where he's actually been put on a few think tanks, and his views are taken seriously by some pretty influential people, most notably the richest man in the world, Elon Musk. And I have never been quite respectful of David Sachs, mostly because I don't think he understands modern warfare. I don't think he understands the war in Ukraine very well. I don't think he understands the history of the war in Ukraine very well. And I think most of his takes about it are very ignorant, very snobby, and the way he talks about it is, in my view, with very respect to the locals there, which is something that particularly rubs me the wrong way. And so when I saw that he was speaking at the RNC as Yammer CEO, I was like, oh my goodness, David Sachs is getting a higher and higher profile. He's on these think tanks. He's near Elon Musk, and Elon Musk is having him whisper into his ear, and it's affecting how he views foreign policy, how he views whether he should donate or not donate to people like Donald Trump, as he openly endorses Donald Trump after he's, and we're looking into the possibility that he's going to be donating like tens of millions of dollars every month to pro-Trump super PACs, which is very concerning, after he said he wasn't going to financially contribute to either campaign, made that commitment on this very platform earlier this year, I think, in fact. I was like, okay, now he's going to be infecting the RNC too? Terrible, awful. But then he wasn't received very well. In fact, I didn't even want to watch it because the dude frustrates me so much because he's just so misinformed. And then I just saw this type of stuff on my Twitter timeline. Funniest shit I've seen in a long time was David Sachs speaking at the RNC, saying Biden provoked Putin to invade Ukraine, getting absolutely no positive response from the crowd over that claim, and they're just nodding in silence because it was supposed to be an applause line. And then I got another one. Honestly, this reaction struck me. Look at the size of this crowd. Nobody clapped at the anti-NATO stuff, anti-Ukraine stuff. Gives the impression this view is much more popular on social media than it is in the real world, even here. And when I saw the first one, I was like, oh, I got to make a note of that. When I saw the second one, I put down what I was doing, and I went and I found the clip, and here it is, posted by, what does this guy do? I forget what he does. Yes, he makes the Vatnik soup stuff, which is the clip of David Sachs blaming Biden for Putin's invasion, saying that Biden provoked Putin, and then moving on to say that Ukraine could have accepted a beautiful peace deal early on. To just, when I say silence, I mean that you could have heard a pin drop. Listen to this.
Then he provoked, yes, provoked the Russians to invade Ukraine with talk of NATO expansion. Afterward, he rejected every opportunity for peace in Ukraine including a deal to end the war just 2 months after it broke out.
Just complete silence. Just no reaction whatsoever from the crowd. They didn't even acknowledge his existence. Usually you at least get like a woo. And in these situations, if you have like a supporter in the crowd or something, and there's like complete silence, like, you know, maybe if they like you, they'll throw in some extra hard claps, like a few like, yeah, you tell him, David, woo, yeah, David. I would hope one of you guys, if I was bombing one night, if I did a live event and I was bombing, one of you guys would throw me a bone. But he doesn't have anyone in that entire crowd throwing a bone. I mean, there is no difference in the audio of him talking, the background audio, and him not talking, because the crowd just, it's as if everybody has chosen the David Sachs portion of the Republican National Committee to go get popcorn and go get a new Pepsi and, you know, let's go to the lobby and go chill with friends and stuff. I mean, listen to this.
Then he provoked the Russians to invade Ukraine with talk of NATO expansion.
I think I hear one clap, but it honestly just might be somebody stepping on the floor hard.
Afterward, he rejected every opportunity for peace in Ukraine, including a deal to end the war just 2 months after it broke out.
Man, what does this suggest to me? What does this suggest to me? I'm trying to take my read from this. I mean, one thing it suggests to me is that David Sachs is not nearly as respected as David Sachs wants to think he is, and that his voice is not nearly as valued as he wants to think it is, especially when it comes to serious politics outside of the online stuff. Like Mario Newfall, if you put him in a room of like serious journalists from the big establishment media companies, I think that he would not be bearing the same respect. And I'm not saying this to be mean to Mario Newfall. I'm just saying that there's different levels to this. And when David Sachs and Mario Newfall are constantly making basic mistakes when they're talking about the topics they're talking about, and they don't come with like extremely like deep conservative roots within the party, not like from the Bush family or anything like that. I mean, essentially, they've just like Twitter posted and social media posted and shit posted their way into positions of prominence. Now, Mario Newfall just stays on the internet, though. This guy is trying to make it serious in politics. He's trying to go out there and he's fundraising tens of millions of dollars, actually. He's trying to fundraise quite a lot of money for the Trump people. But you can fundraise money, you can like shit talk on Twitter, but once you take that Twitter shit talking or that social media foreign policy analysis and you try to project it onto everyday folks and paint it as if Putin was actually not that bad and it's actually much more our fault, I mean, it comes off much more like self-hating than it does anti-Biden. It comes off not well-informed. It doesn't come off well. I mean, just from this 26-second period, all we've talked about is the reception this has had. Let's talk about the fact of the matter, listening to it one more time.
Then he provoked the Russians to invade Ukraine with talk of NATO expansion.
And the nodding here is just so sad. I'm sorry. He really is. He is literally nodding. He's like pause for applause. He's like a half second from please clap here. But the thing, I don't even understand this, because Ukraine was no closer to joining NATO in 2022 than it was in 2008 when it was first talked about. But countries like Germany, France, and others made it very clear that it wasn't happening anytime in the near future because of their relationship with Russia and the fact that Russia wasn't too, excited about it. And that was also true going into 2014, even during the Euromaidan protest. That was about the European Union. That whole conflict then, it all started from the European Union. And Yanukovych pulling back on his promises to join the European Union Association Agreement. I don't understand, at what point it would be Biden that provoked it through NATO expansion. Biden was not a champion, particularly, of NATO expansion into Ukraine. It was other people who were actually championing that. Biden was not the person championing this. So I don't know what he means by Biden provoked it. At best, you could simplify this down to the United States not stopping NATO's expansion, and the United States not explicitly shooting down the idea of Ukraine one day joining NATO and talking about it in an aspirational manner is what provoked Putin. But saying it was Biden, I mean, if we were to keep this fair, you would have to give equal blame to Trump, because Trump, while he was in power for 4 years, didn't shoot down the idea of Ukraine joining NATO permanently. And so I mean, equal blame would be on Biden and Trump, right? But I mean, we're at the RNC, so we can't say that. So it's Biden. Biden wasn't the person who championed NATO expansion. NATO expansion certainly wasn't the only thing that provoked the Russians to invade the country, since Ukraine was no closer to joining NATO in 2022 than it was in 2014 or in 2008. And like, it's just, this feels like if you were to apply the same standards, then you could equally blame Trump for the Russian invasion and say he provoked them as well. And that's just the first half. We've only watched 12 seconds.
Afterward, he rejected every opportunity for peace in Ukraine, including a deal to end the war just 2 months after it broke out.
So, rejected every deal to end. I don't even know what he means by that, because the Biden administration still has a line of communication to the Russians. I believe Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said about a week ago, I can't believe I bothered to keep track of this, that he has just finished another round of communication with his Russian counterpart. And that type of peer-to-peer military communication is important, so we don't have an escalation ladder from like, oh, one jet hit another jet because we weren't properly communicating our military rotations, yada, 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 and we weren't talking to each other, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's important to avoid escalation that could continue to escalate and get really bad. So that's continuing to be maintained. I really just, so I don't know what he means by like every man, because like the Russians could come at any point and like say, hey, we want to talk peace now for real on serious terms. It's a question of our terms and their terms are just polar opposites. The Ukraine's terms and Russia's terms are just still polar opposites, with the Russians just like 2 weeks ago demanding the territory the size of Taiwan on top of what they have already captured from the Ukrainians, meaning that they would want back the city of Kherson, which the Ukrainians fought a bloody battle for and won. They would want the city of Zaporizhia, which the Russians have never taken and have never controlled. It's quite a big city as well. And all of the territory that they're requesting as a precondition to negotiate. Mind you, it's not, hey, you give this territory over and we're done. It's, you give us this territory and then we can continue to negotiate from there. Then we can talk about peace from there. So hypothetically, Ukraine would give up its most defensible positions, pull back, evacuate hundreds of thousands of people, lose all this territory, and then the fighting could hypothetically continue anyway. This position is very different than the Ukrainian position. This position is very different than our position. So the idea that it's like, oh, Biden listens to that beautiful plan and he shoots it down. No, it's that the Ukrainian government has good reasons to not ever respect that type of proposal, to almost like completely dismiss it off of face value. Not because they don't want to negotiate anything, it's just that is a non-starter for negotiations. As for the peace deal 2 months into the war, I believe he's talking about the Istanbul framework, because that was the only quote-unquote peace deal that was being discussed at the time. So basically, the Ukrainians and the Russians, after the Russians invaded Ukraine, after saying they wouldn't, then they invaded Ukraine, they started talking with Erdogan and the Turks as an intermediary, and they started to try to figure out a way to, you know, get the Russians to stop invading and like satisfy them, while also not like seceding into all of their demands. And they were willing to commit to a bunch of things. One of it was, okay, maybe we can commit to not joining NATO. Okay, maybe we can, we can commit to, and they were committing to all these different concessions. You'd have to go back and check the exact framework, because, you know, it's been a while since I read the Istanbul framework. But the sticking point, and this is what's important for this conversation, the sticking point was that eventually the Russians got to the size of the armed forces, and they said that they wanted the Ukrainian armed forces to consist of about 70,000 soldiers. Now, from the Ukrainian perspective, they started the war with about 250,000 soldiers. Mind you, this isn't the only restriction. The restrictions also include a limit on how many tanks Ukraine can have, a limit on how many artillery guns Ukraine can have, a complete, let's just say, neutering of the Ukrainian armed forces. And so from the Ukrainian perspective, they just had the Russians invade them in 2014. And then after the Russians invaded them in 2014, they would then invade them periodically while supporting rebels, mercenaries, and FSB agents fighting in the Donbass for the next 8 years. And then in 2022, after saying that they would not invade again, they've invaded for the second time. So if you're in the Ukrainian position and the people who just invaded you are saying, hey, how about you give up all means to resist after a month of semi-successful resistance? That's a hard sell. And so that was one of the big sticking points, because the Ukrainians had the position of, well, we don't want Ukraine to disappear. And if we give up all of our guns, then next time, instead of having the semi-successful resistance, which then metastasized into very stiff resistance, instead we won't have the means to defend ourselves. And they would be rolled over in the third Russian invasion 4 or 5 years down the line. And so that was the point where negotiations broke down and they weren't able to continue. They weren't able to agree on a tank limit, they weren't able to agree on an artillery limit, and they weren't even able to agree on the size of the armed forces, because at the start of the war, Ukraine had 250,000 soldiers. They wanted them down to 70 to 75,000 soldiers. Considering now that they have something like 600 to 800,000, something in that range, you can, and that's what they need to hold back the largest country on the planet. You can imagine how difficult it would be with 70,000 soldiers. And now you can view it from their perspective that why it would be a non-starter for the burglar who just jumped into your house saying, okay, I'll leave if you give me your gun. Not to mention the fact the last time Ukraine gave Russia their weapons, it was their nuclear weapons, which the Russians said, if you give up your nuclear weapons, then we will not invade you. And then they invaded them. Not only did they invade them, they then used the rockets that the Ukrainians gave them when giving them their nuclear weapons, the delivery systems. They then loaded them up with unitary warheads and then fired them at Ukrainian cities. So from their perspective, this is also a non-starter. So not only was this received poorly by the crowd, he's not even like a smart, intellectual, like rebel who's going out there and like fighting the geopolitical establishment with his new bold ideas. He just still, even on the biggest stage he's probably been on in his life, just underprepared and underinformed. By the way, you can see here in the corner, there's a guy that kind of confronts Matt Gaetz. We got a closer shot of that here, where the guy tells him to tells him to chill the fuck out.
You would get booed off the stage.
Shut up, Gaetz. Don't be an asshole. Don't be an asshole.
Dude, I don't even know who you are, man.
It doesn't fucking matter who I am. Don't be an asshole.
Yeah, I'm just standing here. So I'm looking.
It really felt like he kind of deflated his balloon there, doesn't it? Dude, stop being an asshole. I don't know who you are. That's a Matt Gaetz line if I ever heard one. Hey man, you're being a prick. How many? I don't know you. You're not famous. You're not famous. Very Gaetz thing to say. Anyway, apparently Kevin McCarthy was asked about this interaction after the fact. So not only did Matt Gaetz not look particularly well here or look well on stage, but when Kevin McCarthy was asked about this after the fact, he went in. He talked about the ethics investigation into Matt Gaetz and the allegations of sexual conduct with underage girls. He talked about Matt Gaetz's behavior. You know, I'll just let Kevin McCarthy speak for itself. Point is, it's very clear that Kevin McCarthy is holding nothing back.
Get booed off.
So that's the way
You would get booed off the stage.
That's the biggest challenge we have.
He said you would get booed off the stage. What's your response to him?
Well, he looks very unhinged. I mean, a lot of people have concerns about him. And I'm not sure if he was on something, but I do hope he gets the help that he needs. But more importantly, I hope the young women get the justice they deserve when it comes to him.
I mean, you're referring to the House Ethics Committee investigation that is ongoing.
Yeah, with his partner in jail because they paid underage women for sex and drugs. Yeah, that's what I'm referring
to. So he is denied.
Oh my God, he stops it to list out everything. Just to clarify, the pain of underage women and the taking of drugs, specific, drugs as in, you should start doing like a joint motion. No, that's not good enough. It needs to be crack motion. Really get the point across.
All of that. I'm wondering, doesn't he deserve the presumption of innocence here?
Well, people are in jail. The women have confirmed it. He came to me. If I still wanted to be speaker, I could have done something illegal and stopped the ethics committee investigation that started 4 years before.
He told you to stop the ethics.
Yeah, that's what the whole motion to vacate was about.
The Law and Justice Party, not Law and Justice, I just got confused with the Polish party. The Law and Order Party. Law and Order. Man, there seems to be a lot of people who just think that in the MAGA movement, in the upper echelons, who just think they're above the law. I wonder if there's anybody in the MAGA movement that could have inspired them to think that their political operatives did not need to be held to the same standards as everybody else.
He wanted me to engage and thought somehow I started this investigation. It started long before I was ever speaker. And as you know, as Congress, I don't get involved in ethics. It's an equal number. They could investigate me. It has to be its own arm and branch. And so he wanted to leverage me to try to do that. And if I didn't, he wanted to do a motion to vacate.
And he's denied that, of course, that he urged you to stop the investigation.
No, I had other members come to me. He came to me. I had other people who were on TV that he talked to. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So no, there's no denying it.
My gosh, I love the Matt Gaetz dirty laundry getting aired out in public. This is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful transparency. Dude, if he just wouldn't have talked in Kevin McCarthy's era, if he just would have left him alone. Like, this is such an easy area of attack for anybody within the party, especially if what Kevin McCarthy is saying here is true. Now, it's impossible for me to know because I was not there. Kevin McCarthy, it seems to be claiming that others were also contacting him to try to shut down the investigation into Matt Gaetz on Matt Gaetz's behalf. So that would imply that there were other witnesses and people with knowledge. Then again, if they're carrying that information on behalf of Matt Gaetz, I don't know how willing they're going to be to come out against him. Point is, though, if what he is saying here is true, how out of all the people to try to corner him, you go after him, he could drop that bomb at any point, even if it doesn't mean you get arrested or anything. Just the fact that he's poking it with a broomstick, he's just dragging attention to it. Why would you do that? Why? It's God. Matt Gaetz looks plastic. He comes off as plastic, but guess what? If you see him playing with dolls, there might be some other intentions. So please call your local police department if you see that behavior from the man. My goodness. My goodness. Out of all the people, why Kevin McCarthy? What is it with people in the MAGA movement specifically screwing over their fixers?